Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I am going to go ahead and start a new series that I will be doing at least every once in a while. So this is basically sketchbook sessions. Basically, when I tend to draw inside of a sketchbook, occasionally, yeah, I put a little masterpiece in there, but a lot of the time I find myself just working through ideas or studying things. And I'm on a specific website, reference.sketchdaily.net /en for English, I believe. Anyhow, this is a really interesting website because, like, you can just kind of look at full body parts, animals, structure, vegetation. These are different types of references that this website can get you. And I was actually turned on by this specific site by a person on my Discord server called Red Rose Veronica, and she tends to pop out a number of really good images. This is one of hers. Really good. I just think it's phenomenal. So anyhow, while we're at it, while I'm looking at my Discord server, if you haven't joined my Discord server, a link is in the video description below. Be sure to join it. Sometimes I offer a hell of a lot of critiques. Really cool stuff typically tends to happen there. I really like my community. Also, if you find yourself watching my videos and yet you still haven't subscribed, please feel free to do so. Every little bit helps. Also, here's a subscriber of mine. This is Draconian Rain. He's kind of a buddy. He's actually had a presence on my channel a little bit. As you can see, he's wearing one of my t-shirts, which is awesome. He was my first customer. You can see the artwork, Dare to Dream. Kind of looks like a mirror image of the actual image, but yeah. Anyhow, ladies, if you think this is smoking, maybe you should go ahead and go buy one. Dudes, if you want to pick up the hot ladies and pick up the smolder, be sure to pick one up. Once again, in order to purchase one of my t-shirts, just go to my channel, just click on one of my videos. It doesn't matter which one you do. Most of them in recent history have it, and you just go ahead and expand where it says so more. It says, if you'd like to purchase a t-shirt made by me, feel free to visit my Teespring. Just go ahead and click on that, and you have access to my t-shirts. So anyhow, moving on. So on this website, Sketch Daily Reference, basically I'm just going to go with okay, I'm gonna select animals. Okay, species, let's go all. Category, let's go all. View, all. I could, like, if you restrict yourself to front or side or back or above, like to just one view, and you never explore other angles, you're just going to be stuck drawing the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to make sure that the view is always permanent. And time limit, I'm not going to really concern myself with the time limit as it concerns the website. So I'm going to say no timer, and I'm going to click start, and it brings this up. Okay, I don't really want to draw that. Let's take a look at this. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go ahead and plop it into Clip Studio Paint. So when I went ahead and started to work on this eagle, I knew that it would probably be a little bit difficult to get the likeness. Birds, especially like eagles or hawks or something like that, they have a very difficult look. It's hard to really define. It's just, you know, a series of, if you get the angles wrong, it all just kind of falls apart. And then, you know, the eyes, they may be just a perfect circle, but the accompanying dimensions around the eyes can make it look like it's angry, just where the shadows are placed and such like that. I think I got it kind of closely approximate to where it needed to be with a 10-minute time limit. That was the main goal for at least this sketchbook session. I wanted to go for a 10-minute time limit for my images, and I went a little bit over that with a few of them. Sometimes the alarm that I set wouldn't actually go off and such like that. But with that time limit in general, what I found was there wasn't enough time to really study what I was looking at. So, you know, even though this is like a really good exercise to just kind of draw out the impression of an object, can you get the essence of what it is that you're drawing, and pick and choose what details you're going to emphasize inside of your image, and will that be enough to communicate what that is, with the fewest number of lines, the fewest number of details that you're able to study in the span of 10 minutes. Can you communicate? You're drawing a hawk, or you're drawing an eagle, or you're drawing whatever it is that you're drawing. It's a really good exercise, but it's not the type of exercise that I would recommend to everyone all the time. Generally, I would say if you're just starting out, this is not an exercise that you should be actually focusing on at all. I personally feel as though if you are a newbie artist and you're struggling just to draw things and comprehend the dimension, like the three-dimensionality of objects and such like that, you take your time. Draw for a couple of hours and see if you can try to get it figured out and such like that. Now, once again, even though I set a 10-minute time limit, I wasn't like being a stickler on myself. Once the alarm would go off, I didn't want to just have a piece of crap as the final result, but the time limit went off at this point inside of the footage, and I'm looking it over and I can't help but think, yeah, that looks like a hawk. It looks pretty good. When you compare it to the actual reference, there are differences, and that is a little bit disappointing, but it's still good. So this was the next image, a fish. Now, when I was a teenager, if I ever had someone say, why don't you draw a fish, I would have thought, well, who the hell wants to draw a fish? But as I started to draw it, I started to really notice some subtleties about it that were kind of interesting. I kind of started out with blotting out kind of a background for it, just kind of impressionistically drawing the background, and that's where I started to actually kind of comprehend what this exercise really does. It forces you to start out with impressionism. Eventually, I kind of started to connect the dots, and I started thinking, oh, okay, yeah, this is like drawing a thumbnail image. Yeah, exactly. This is how you draw your thumbnail images, basically. With like normally, within 10 minutes or something, 10-15 minutes, I have a thumbnail sketch all completely drawn out. But I wound up drawing this much more refined. I even had like cross hatching going on with it, and I wound up actually using the smudge brush. This particular image of the fish, I feel, wound up turning out a hell of a lot better than most of the images that I wound up drawing. And I mean, it's not like the most elaborate sort of thing to work on, but there are subtleties that I wanted to kind of focus on that I didn't have enough time to focus on, like the scales on the fish and how it interacts with the lighting inside of the scene and such like that. But even after the timer went off, I decided, okay, well, I'm just gonna play with a little bit more of the shadows. I believe I did that, and I wound up using the smudge brush. I did a little bit of cross hatching to kind of imply some of the little spots that are on the fish and such. And it's at this point, the main thing that kind of slowed me down was that when I was laying down the shadows and such, basically I was using a separate layer and trying to make heads and tails of these layers. When you have a 10-minute time limit, you're not able to label them. You're not really able to make heads or tails of them very well. So it's really easy to grab the wrong layer and then just kind of cover up a lot of your line work. And then, oh crap, I need to press Control-Z a bunch of times. And that was a bit of a frustration. But I think it worked out. And the time limit went off right about at this point now. And you can see, yeah, I'm still working on it, but I wanted to keep on working on it. Is the funny thing. When looking at it, I was thinking, well, it's a fish, whatever. It should be kind of easy to draw. But the subtleties of it were enough to make me as I was actually drawing it, it made me want to continue to draw it. But I tried to limit myself to like just doing 1 minute worth of continued artwork after the alarm went off. And I think it came out looking really good. It's one of the better images for this sketchbook session. And so the next image that I wound up working on wound up being, let's see, this right here. It's an ape. A great ape. So I wound up saving it, and I plopped it into my Clip Studio Paint file here. Now, sometimes Clip Studio Paint has difficulty recognizing different types of file types, so I kept Affinity Designer open. If Clip Studio Paint doesn't recognize an image file, you can just throw that image into Affinity Photo or Affinity Designer, and you can just immediately export it as a PNG or as a JPEG and what have you. I had difficulty making out the details initially, so I wound up applying a curves like correction layer on the reference image and just kind of brightening up the image a little bit just so that I could actually make out the details. And yeah, you know, I struggled with the shape of the head, but you know, I just drew something out for the head initially. It's better to start with something rather than nothing, and so, you know, that's kind of what I did. And then I just started to kind of refine the shape that I initially had. It's weird because, like, I like animals and such like that, but I've never really, like, there's a lot of people that have really connected to the great apes. They just think that they're the greatest things ever, and they have this massive amount of compassion towards the great apes, and I haven't really been able to really understand that, but it was interesting the sorts of emotions that I was feeling as I was drawing this. It completely changed kind of my perception of an ape, the great apes and such. Now the fluffiness, the hairiness of this thing, I wound up drawing out the basic shape of the ape, and then I just wound up using an eraser and just kind of made that basic shape of its head kind of like a dotted line, and then I kind of drew some perpendicular lines to it in order to imply that it was fluffy. And then I wound up just kind of sketching out a bit of, you know, the arms, and I noticed that the arms were a lot hairier, longer hair than, say, its head and its face and such like that. And you know, this is another one of the images, like, I didn't get the chance to really refine the image or anything like that, but I kind of feel like if I had decided to use, like, the smudge brush a little bit more with this particular image instead of doing a lot of cross-hatching, then maybe some things would have turned out a little bit better. You can see me kind of revisiting different parts because some of the cross-hatching that I did initially was a little bit too subtle, and so once I put that black chest in there that's shrouded in shadow, it kind of made some of the cross-hatching that I did previously feel a little bit obsolete. But the timer went off right about at this point, and I just kind of kept on going for a little bit more. I didn't want to just abandon it to just a primitive state, but yeah, I mean, this is pretty good. This is where I kind of still was deviating from just doing an impressionistic sort of image, but you know, it is still very good. I can picture this actually being an image that Frank Frazetta would have drawn, and it just, I don't know, like, I look at this image and I see quality, I see craftsmanship, so I'm happy with it. I think it's a good, solid, like, image, and you know, whether it's finished or not, I look at it and I appreciate it. And so yeah. So the next image that I decided to tackle was this frog, and you know, again, in high school I never would have really wanted to draw a frog. I've drawn frogs in the past, but most of them have been from memory, and usually just little cartoon froggies. But this was kind of interesting. Like, the end result isn't something that I would really want to share because the end result was more like I don't know. It's just a frog, and if I had the time to actually draw what the frog was sitting on and such like that, it would have made it look a lot more appealing, especially with how these leaves actually look. These leaves are just really interesting. Just, you know, the whites and the greens, they look really cool, and yet you know, I just simply didn't have the time. And I really deviate, like, another thing is, you know, instead of shooting for being impressionistic, I wanted to actually really focus in on the the details like how I do when I'm drawing out a masterpiece. This is just something that I'm really used to doing, drawing out masterpieces, and that's just not what this exercise is about. It forces you to draw impressionistically, and I'm not used to that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's more like this is how you sketch sort of exercise. That's what impressionism initially was. It was a bunch of painters that really actually appreciated their rough sketch of a painting a lot better than the final painting, and so they wound up submitting those rough paintings, those rough sketches, into art galleries, and they wound up receiving a lot of criticism. But I think Impressionism has a valid place in the art world. It's like, especially as it was introduced initially, because like the people that were introducing, Impressionism into the art world, they were classically trained. They actually knew what the hell they were doing, and such like that. Whereas nowadays, a lot of the people, they just don't know. I don't know. When it comes to like art, illustration, things like that, I feel like the people that have the ultimate say and are the ultimate guardians of the definition of what like art is, and what qualifies as craftsmanship and such like that, that would happen to be the people that know the technical skills the most. Those are the ultimate guardians of what that whole spectrum is. And so the timer went off right about at this point, and it's a decent frog, but a frog out of its context, outside of its environment, is just kind of boring. I mean, it just kind of looks like a sprite for a video game, completely absent from its environment, and it all by itself is nothing to really share, and so that was disappointing. So I skipped over to this image of a little chipmunk. I thought, oh, how cute. Now chipmunks are kind of difficult because chipmunks, rats, mice, weasels, and all that, there's little slight subtleties that you have to get right, and if you don't get them right, then you could accidentally make a mouse look like a squirrel, or a squirrel look like a hamster, or what have you. Like, you could easily make these creatures look like the wrong creature. And looking back and actually looking at the footage, I think the main issue is that I drew the button nose of this little thing the right way, only that it needed to be a little bit more narrow. The face comes to a point just a little bit differently than how I drew it. So it does, like, when you look at it, it's like, yeah, to some extent it looks kind of like a squirrel, but it could be a mouse, I guess. And so, there's a little bit of disappointing with the final image of this, but you can see that I kind of worked with some basic shapes. I used kind of like an oval, and when I say oval, I mean I'm thinking about it as a three-dimensional oval sort of shape, and a cone for its head, and I just kind of connected those two parts together. I tried to include reflections in the eyes. Looking back, I should have just colored it in black and then just used a white brush and put those little highlights into its, or reflections into its eyes and such. And I needed to kind of do a little bit of a transformation to its head. I felt like it was just a little bit too big proportionately, and some of what makes a squirrel look like a squirrel is the coloring around its eyes. And so there's this little pattern of dark hair, and then there's this little pattern of white hair that goes above and below the eyes, and I don't feel like I had enough time to actually put that in the way that I wanted to. But it is what it is. It turned out looking okay. I think the funnest part of drawing this little guy was actually drawing its feet. I've never actually looked at a squirrel's feet, and they are some ugly looking things, but they are really actually kind of cool in their own way. I mean, you think of a squirrel and you think, oh, how cute, but then you look at his feet and it's like, ugh, that's kind of weird and creepy. But with the context of its whole body, you just go, oh, how cute. And right about here is where the alarm went off, and I decided, no, I want to kind of keep working on it a little bit more. I don't know, I just wanted to refine a few things a little bit more, but, you know, it's kind of like a little something that kind of feels like it's been abandoned to some extent. But that's the final image right there, and I think it came out looking okay. I think I needed a different angle for its jaw and stuff like that. The next image I decided to kind of tackle was you know, a tree branch with I think they're cherries, and so I decided to kind of go a lot more impressionistic with this one. For the branches, I decided to just draw a solid black line, and for the highlights on those brushes or branches, I decided to use a white brush, and that seemed like it worked pretty well. And I think drawing trees like this really impressionistically, actually, it's not a bad idea for an illustration, in that, especially when things are off in the distance and stuff like that, especially for backgrounds. But you know, came out looking pretty good. I just wound up just drawing out these somewhat big black dots for each of the cherries, and just kind of drew little stringy bits going towards the branch, and that seemed to work out pretty good. And then I put a white highlight on them to try to kind of bring them out and get people to perceive, okay, these are you know, these are actually round spherical sort of objects, sort of. And yeah, I think that worked out pretty well. And I think the main failing with this image, where I failed with it, was drawing the foliage, the actual leaves and such like that. And I'm not really quite sure what I could have done to do it differently. I mean, I guess I could have possibly just started out with doing the branches and then the foliage and then the cherries. I think my main frustration was, well, I'll have, like, I might run into an issue where I wind up interfering with the white highlights on the cherries, and you know, I was thinking maybe I need to just create a new layer, and messing around with layers with a 10-minute time limit just didn't feel right. I mean, I did it a little bit inside of this video here and there, but I don't know, I didn't have enough time to put shadows or highlights on the leaves, and I kind of feel like I should have. I should have done something, but it would have involved either cross-hatching, which is really time-consuming, or creating another layer, which is disorienting with a 10-minute time limit, and then putting down some shadows and then using the smudge brush on them. And yeah, I didn't, you know, it's kind of weird. It's kind of like a trade-off. Well, do I waste a lot of time cross-hatching, or do I wind up kind of disorienting myself with another layer, that sort of thing? And so a 10-minute time limit went off right about now, and this is kind of the finished image. It's okay. It's not something that I would really go about sharing around it. But the next image that I wound up working on was a set of cactuses. Now, this, for some reason, the alarm did not go off, so I wound up working on this for about 12 minutes, but it felt like I was working on it for 20 minutes, and I'm not really quite sure why. But of all the images, I feel like this is the most refined, but to some extent I think it's kind of because, I mean, look at it, it's just a series of really basic shapes, and it's not like there's a ton of detail. And you know, the gray canvas, working with a gray canvas is superior to working with a white canvas, I would say, like any day of the week, because like you're able to actually draw in white, and so you're able to just put in your highlights rather than trying to you know, darken the entire image so that you can just avoid the highlights, and so that you have highlights. That's the sort of workflow that you have with when you're working with you know, a white canvas. But with the gray canvas, everything is already you know, set to being a darker value, and to some extent you probably only recognize that at the very beginning of the video, oh, he's working with a gray canvas, and then you probably forgot that I was working with a gray canvas. Like just last week I showed my dad one of my videos, and he's like, oh, how are you drawing in white? And then I told him, well, the canvas is gray. And he's like, is it? yeah, so it's kind of interesting. If you don't have anything as a point of reference, when someone starts drawing in white, all of a sudden the gray no longer is, white to your perception. Like after a while of looking at gray, you just think of it as white. And also it's actually better for your eyes to work with a gray canvas as well. Just having white constantly being thrown at your face throws a lot of blue light actually at your eyes, which is actually really harmful to an artist or anyone working on a computer. So if you have any opportunity to not look at something that's white on your screen, try to take that opportunity. But yeah, you can see I took my time. I wound up putting in a whole bunch of cross hatching, and I didn't have the luxury of working with a whole bunch of layers, but this is like having the 10-minute time limit forces you to have a very paper-like, like physical material-like workflow, and that's fine because if you were drawing out something like a thumbnail, that typically that's how I draw a thumbnail. Okay, so this is around the point in time when I started to realize, I know 10 minutes have passed at this point, and so I double checked, and yeah, the alarm didn't go off, but yeah, it doesn't matter. I only wound up working on it for 2 minutes longer than I should have, but here I kind of draw out a stick figure man of a cowboy, because it did kind of bring to mind, I think it's convincing cactus. It looks pretty good. And then I decided to tackle this. I wanted to kind of venture out from drawing animals and plants and such like that. I wanted to have a little bit of diversity to what it was that I was actually working on inside of this video so that it wasn't completely boring. But this is where I really, really struggled. Basically, what wound up happening was, I got overly technical. I wanted to focus on that vanishing point. I wanted to make sure that my perspective was just right, and I started to micromanage it, and even still with the micromanaging, it didn't wind up looking any better, which is really frustrating. And I actually only probably drew about a quarter of it in the 10-minute time period that I allotted for myself, but I didn't want to leave it as just this 1/4 of a building as a failure. So I wound up drawing the rest of it as fast as I could. This is the one image that I feel is the least like the actual reference, and that's what I feel, because it's a horrible image. The final version of it, you can see me just kind of really being way too overly technical. Here I am just obsessing over stuff that doesn't matter, in that, like, I mean, I don't know, it does matter, especially if you're trying to draw it correctly, but focusing on every single face of an object and trying to see every single little tiny detail just really did not work out. And I wasn't thinking draw impressionistically enough. I wasn't thinking in those terms enough, and so the image just didn't come out right. But ultimately, I kind of feel like with most backgrounds, especially with really good architecture, I really need at least 45 minutes. 45 minutes to have a real drawing of a background with really nice architecture. Like, there are buildings that I draw inside of this this video here that wind up looking okay, but this particular one not so much is the thing. But even the ones that turned out looking okay, it's just like, okay, this is just a rough sketch that I would use as something like a thumbnail. Really, genuinely, that's all it would ever be. But by the time that I would want to refine the image and such like that, it would be separated from the reference image. And so I'm not going to be refining any of these images at all, ever in the near future, or ever, really. The idea is just to kind of get the image out there as quickly as possible, just to see if I can. And the time limit has already passed, and you can actually see me actually really speeding up really fast. And I actually sped up this footage a lot faster after the alarm went off. I probably spent probably about 30 minutes on just this image, and even still it didn't come out right. And it's just because I was kind of panicking. I'm like, I'm out of time. I need to be done. I need to be done. I need to be done. And yeah, it just winds up looking like a complete and total ugly mess. I'm not proud of it, but you know, it's kind of like a warm-up is kind of what it felt like. And it's like, okay, cool, whatever. So this is the final image. Nothing to write home about. It's not special. It's not interesting. It's just frustrating. So this is the next image that I decided to tackle, something easier. I decided I wasn't going to be drawing the arches up at the top, but I wanted to draw the door, and I wanted to draw that window. Something about it just looked really interesting to me. I really kind of gravitated towards it. I drew out a few sketchy lines to kind of represent kind of perspective lines, and this image I wound up actually even just a door and a stupid circular window wound up taking longer than 10 minutes, which is kind of frustrating. Because I really wanted to make this look cool. I mean, it is a cool looking door. I mean, like at first glance you might look at it and be like, oh, it's just a door and a weird circular window. But no, once you start drawing it and you actually start paying attention to the ornate details around the door and within that you know, the spire, or the, I don't know, the rooftop looking thing that's on top of the door, it's got a lot of really cool ornate stuff going on with it. And this is a lot of the frustration with not being able to hit the deadline was just that I didn't have enough time to look at the details, and what details I did put in, they were probably the wrong details, so I wound up focusing too much on just the little stuff. And I actually, after the time limit actually passed, I actually wound up kind of reassessing the workflow to some extent. I wound up thinking, okay, well, how could I draw this window faster? How could I have? And so you'll see the first attempt, and I'll go ahead and explain it to you when I wind up working on the window, and then I'll explain the second attempt when it comes up on the screen. But you know, even still, I'm glad that I spent just probably about 13-14 minutes on this particular image, just simply because this came out looking really good. I didn't want all of the background images that I draw inside of this sketchbook session video to just look like complete and total garbage. Looking back, I kind of feel like, okay, well, maybe I need to shoot not just for an impressionistic looking style, but a much more stylistic approach to drawing backgrounds, and so maybe that might work out for me a little bit better in the future. So this is the first attempt. So what I wound up doing is I kind of drew out kind of you know, a circle. I draw out all the little extrusions and stuff like that, and then I pull out my pencil, and then I draw an outline around each and every single one of those lines. And that's fine, but the thing is if you don't have the time to draw out that outline, it winds up looking god awful. I mean, look at it. It just looks terrible. Whatever. It is what it is. But you know, it's a black window, or at least it looks black to us, at least from our perspective. This, like, being outside, maybe it's just that the interior inside of that window is dark, like the lights aren't on. And so I wanted to kind of make it black, but you know, there were little openings and little sketchy lines that prevented me from just using the fill brush. And so I wound up doing an experiment. I drew out a circle, basically just filled it in, and then used the eraser. And so I'm like, okay, so the time limit's already up. I can just do what I can to just try to get this finished and make it look nice after the time limit went off. And then I decided to kind of create another layer, put it underneath my line work, and then just kind of put down some grays, and then smudge brush, and then some grays again. And it wound up looking really good. Like, this looks good. I mean, regardless, and even after I feel like I'm finished, I'm like, oh, well, I forgot these little details, and just drew out like 4 or 5 different lines. And then, yeah, that's when I decided, okay, I've messed with this enough. It's time to move on to the next one. And so the next image wound up being this, and I thought, okay, well, the last image turned out looking pretty good. This is a lot more elaborate. Maybe if I use perspective guides, which, because I was obsessed with the vanishing points and such like that. But no, this is the wrong approach. Don't use a perspective guide. This is where I started to kind of like using a perspective guide on a thumbnail. Why would you do that? That makes no sense. Why would you do that? So yeah, there came a point where I started getting so frustrated with the perspective guides that I just decided, no, I'm just going to turn off the perspective guides and just freehand it. And again, I was focusing on every single little face to every single little object to every single little piece, and that's fine. It's just, there's little columns that are attached to the walls and such like that, and instead of trying to fixate on these little tiny lines that are associated to this little maybe 6-inch face that's pointed away from us, that's associated to that little column attached to the wall, I could have just drawn, like, instead of 3 lines, with 2 of those lines being like paired together really, really close, I could have just drawn 2 lines and just called that good. And so yeah, that wound up really slowing me down and really frustrating me. And again, I wound up working on this a little bit longer than 10 minutes, probably about 15, I think. And even still, it didn't turn out looking the way that I wanted. But on the other hand, it did turn out significantly better, and I drew it out significantly faster than the first background that I wound up drawing for this sketchbook session. And yeah, you can see that I'm just moving as fast as I can, and some of my lines are super sloppy, and it's like, wow, this just comes off as complete and total impressionism, and that's the way it's supposed to look, I guess. 10-minute timeline, it has to be impressionism, has to be super, super rough sketch. And yeah, I am moderately happy with this image. I wish I could be a lot happier with it, but if you just don't have the time, you just don't have the time. And I look at this and I think, yeah, that's a heck of a good sketch. Yeah, I could do so much with that. And like, if I was drawing a comic book and I started to ink this, I could have all sorts of different sorts of decisions to make just by looking at what I have lined out here. Whether I have the reference in front of me or not, while inking it, I could make all sorts of cool decisions. And it looks pretty good. I like it in its own way, but it's not a complete and total like abomination like the first background. So it's got that going for it. Okay, so this is the next image that I decided to tackle. It's kind of like a scene that you would more so see inside of Mexico, I think. And I wound up using some interesting decisions and an interesting workflow for this one. So I quickly sketched out these little supports for the roof, and that happened really, really quick. I didn't concern myself with the vanishing point at all. I just kind of thought, okay, well, I just got to go. And I couldn't really make out what was right here. It looked like some weird bell shape inside of the reference, but whatever my first assumption is, that's what's going to be there. And then I kind of drew out the zone where the archways needed to be, and then I just went ahead and drew out the arches and then the pillars associated to them, I think. And oh yeah, I wanted to fill in with white. Yeah, okay, so the pillars got drawn in and right there, and then I decided, okay, well, I need to fill in any gaps so that I could fill in white in this region. Okay, that looks good. And then I'm like, well, there's stuff behind these arches and such like that, behind these pillars and all that. So I wound up creating another layer, kind of risked disorienting myself with a layer underneath my line work, and just use a smudge brush to kind of put some shadow in there. And then this little bit of this roof here, it was really elaborate, and so I decided, okay, well, I'm just going to kind of draw out some quick kind of impression of the elaborate design. And then there's these little tiny spiky looking things, and so I drew out one as a silhouette of it, and then I placed it in there, pressed Control C, Control V, and then just kind of moved it. and then press Control E, and then just pressed Control C, Control V, and then repeat in order to get all of these in there as fast as I can. Now, about 3 of them don't conform to the perspective as they should, but I didn't have time for that. It's just, okay, something impressionistic. And so this actually worked out really well because it got the idea of the image on the canvas as quickly as possible. And I feel like I actually drew out these pillars a little bit more accurately. There's one detail that these pillars have that are missing on the pillars to the right. And the alarm went off right about now. And I decided to work on it for another like 15 seconds. And so that's the final image. And you can see that I drew a border around it. I genuinely treated it like a thumbnail image. So this was the second image that I decided to tackle. And I felt like, you know, they just look like boxes to me. I can draw this image out. And this is actually the best background right here. Like, the background that I just barely finished and the background that I'm currently going to be working on wound up being the best backgrounds that I wound up working on, and which is kind of a relief, actually. Yeah, never mind. You know, the one with the door was stinking good too, but I started to kind of gain in confidence, and especially when I started to abandon the idea of working with a vanishing point. Now, of course, you know, if I was going to ink these, I would actually pull out the vanishing points and figure out what would be the best place for those vanishing points, and then I would refine these. But when you're just treating it like a thumbnail sketch, you're just going as fast as you can, get the impression of things. And you know, it's interesting because like you still do wind up absorbing some details about architecture that you've never noticed before. Even though you're moving as fast as you can, you're still absorbing these concepts fairly well. And so I was thinking, okay, a bush here. No, how about I just put in a kind of a spongy brush right here? Yeah, sponge brush. That'll be the bushes. And then I wound up kind of making a few and then gave it a stem. And oh, there I have a tree. Really quick and easy. And then I kind of just drew out a bunch of boxes. And within a short period of time, I really just had this picture just kind of drawn out, which is really satisfying. And then I had enough time actually to even finish drawing out the dirt. You know, there's this little wall inside of the foreground. I wound up drawing that sort of, kind of, and yeah, it came out looking really well. And then I kind of impressionistically drew out some sort of background, and some of it's just implied details, really. And there's only so much that I could focus on with the background itself, and so it's just like, okay, well, some impression that there's like dirt that goes that kind of like there's a little bit of a hill over here and all that. And the timer went off right about here, and I kind of continued to kind of work on it just a touch, not a whole lot, but just a touch. But ultimately this is the finished image right here, and I actually feel rather satisfied with it. And I'm actually really satisfied with this video in general. And some of these images, most of these images that you've seen in this video, I'm going to be sharing on social media, including my Discord server. Once again, a link to my Discord server is in the video description below. This was fun. This was interesting. It was an exercise to try to get me to just care about putting the essential details down, and that's it. And that was a satisfying experience for me. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me, feel free to join my Discord. The link to my Discord is in the video description below. If you'd like to support this channel, there's a link in the video description below to my Teespring where you can purchase one of my t-shirts. Any support would be much appreciated. And if you've enjoyed this content and would like to see more, feel free to click on anything else appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.